Hello, I'm Jeff Johnston, host of the Living Undeterred podcast. And again, as normal, we have another stellar guest. I was honored to be a guest on his show, which we're going to talk a lot about today. Because the objective when I reciprocate this is to turn the spotlight on my guest. As a guest on a show, they talk about my life and my journey and my struggles. And now it's time to kind of flip the switch. And today we're going to talk to Nathan Coy. He's the host of the Wartime Leadership Podcast. And I was just talking to him before we came on the air. Nathan's show hasn't been around that long. I feel like mine is new, Nathan, at a year and a half. Yours is much shorter.
Oh, yeah.
And I was stunned. I thought you did an awesome job. I did not feel like that you're kind of new to the podcasting world. But anyway, we'll get to all this and more topics. I have a lot of really good questions to ask you. But anyway, thank you for joining the show, and I appreciate you coming on board tonight.
Man, Jeff, I am so excited. Yes, we are new to the podcasting world. I'm on just released episode 6, and we're getting we're getting ready to have our 2-month here in a couple of weeks, and it's just kind of surreal the type of guests that we've been able to have on. Yourself, and so many individuals that have kind of come around to grab onto us and kind of help us along the route is just absolutely amazing. It really is like a big family.
Yeah, and I will tell you, I was kind of thrust into this mental health, substance abuse, addiction arena like 5 years ago, and the story is as you get older. I'm older than you. I'm 56, and you don't have to tell me how old you are, but I know you're younger than me. Uh, the story is as you get older, your circle of friends start to shrink, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not in this world, man. I mean, my friends are expanding, and I add you to that list, and it's like I'm adding great people to my life every day, and I can't imagine being an old person sitting on my couch with 3 friends, and to me that would be frustrating. And I understand that as you get older, people die around you and all
Mm-hmm.
that, but I think it's very important to try to keep expanding your base of humans, your well of great people you can go to in time of need. And so again, I think the podcast world has really opened my eyes to the type of people that are out there. And what's great is to share stories.
Mm-hmm.
And you and I sat there for an hour and we talked about a lot of stuff in my life. But I'm really intrigued in how you came up with wartime leadership. The spiritual resiliency term that you hang your hat on, that you really tried to pin down from me, I thought was really interesting because I've never had anyone talk about spiritual resiliency.
Well,
Um,
you know,
it's an interesting term, and I'd love to have you, if you want to jump onto that right now, I'd love to have you talk about what does that mean to you.
oh, absolutely. So I come from the military. I'm active duty. I've been active duty for almost 18 years now, and
Thank you for your service.
I appreciate the support. One thing that we always talk about is resiliency, but we talk about it from a perspective of CAF, the Comprehensive Airman Fitness, and you
Hmm.
look at it in social, mental, emotional, and then, well, there's physical and there's spiritual in there.
Mm-hmm.
We tell everyone that you must be physically resilient. You have to be mentally resilient. We tell you how to we tell you how to do that. That's in exercising, that's in walking around, that's going and seeing something, that's hanging out with your family. But when it comes to the spiritual resiliency, we're really really bad about explaining what that looks like.
Mm.
And so that's kind of where all of this has come from, is how are we spiritually resilient? How are we supposed to be that? Is it
Right.
found in God? Is it found in nature? Is it? And so that's really the journey that I've taken, is just to kind of identify what it looks like in different people's lives, because it looks different. We try to cookie cutter it, right? We try to
Right.
we try to put a face on it, and it's not that simple. It can be found in a lot of different places and in a lot of different ways to different people. So I don't try to
So
push that
what
on anyone.
right, what does spirituality mean to you?
So for me personally, in my
Right.
personal life, it is found in scripture. It is
Mm-hmm.
found in God. It's found in a relationship with Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
That's where it's found for me. It's found
Mm-hmm.
in that personal relationship. To me, healing happens in the context of relationship. And that's
Mm-hmm.
really, really important because I need to be able to share that relationship with other people as well as my God. So it's as much
Right.
here as much as it is here.
Hmm. Have you always had that definition of spirituality your whole life, or were you a point in your life where you were questioning things, and then something happened and you became more, I guess, more of a believer?
Well, so I was raised Christian. I was raised in a very strong, devout Christian environment. We traveled that route. I went to church every Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. It was very structured
Mm-hmm.
in how that was. And in the 80s and 90s, I'm 42 years old, right? So I've got my parents who, they're now in their 70s.
Right.
It was a very structured, very, you wore your Sunday clothes, you the tie, the jacket. Um and I was good all the way up through college. So I started college at the University of Central Oklahoma and immediately was drawn into Christian organizations, but I very quickly ran away from it.
Hmm.
Very, very quickly went on my own journey, right?
What turned you off about that?
It, I think I found that there was a lot of people in this world, in the Christian sphere, that were
Mm-hmm.
very, you know, living with their thumb on me.
Mm.
And it was very, it turned me off in so many different ways.
Yeah.
And I didn't want that in my life. I had a good structure, I
Mm-hmm.
had what I had, but as I started to see other people and the way other Christians were living, it very much pushed me away and pushed me more
Hmm.
towards a bottle, right? So I was a heavy
Yeah.
drinker throughout
Yep.
college. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Me too.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
why we
We
had
talked
such a
about it
good,
on your show.
yeah.
Yep.
We had a
Yep.
great talk about that, but now you get to hear my
Yep.
side. I fell into the bottle
Yeah.
really, really bad.
Hmm.
I was not living the way that I needed to. It wasn't healthy. It wasn't emotionally, physically, mentally. It wasn't healthy. But for me, it was a release. It was a way
Hmm.
to exit out of the world that I was living in, and to kind of run away to something that I sought, that momentary glimpse of fun, right?
Hmm.
And that's exactly what it was. It was fun. I'm not gonna lie. It was a blast. I
Right.
had a great time slowly killing myself.
Right.
Um, I did turn to drugs for a little bit, but it was very
Mm-hmm.
momentary. It wasn't a very long time at all.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because I didn't find any joy in that at all.
Hmm.
Um, and then I left college. Kind of had a couple of failed businesses that I didn't have my heart in it. It wasn't
Right.
it wasn't something that I found passion in.
Mm-hmm.
So during the late 90s, early 2000s, of course, the economy kind of took a little bit of a tank,
Yep.
and was trying to find new and active stuff to do to fill the time and the void. I mean, 23 years old, I finally decided I ran to an Air Force recruiter. My brother was
Huh.
currently serving. My dad had served in the Air Force.
Okay.
My dad had served in Vietnam. My brother
Mm.
during Iraq. So I thought, well, I'll go in, I'll do 4 years, call it good, get my feet under me, and I'll be done with it. Uh, thought everything was going to be great, was going to be good. I was 24 years old, going through basic training, getting yelled at by somebody who was about my same age, maybe a little bit older than me. Uh, I thought, well, I needed structure, so here it is. Here's my structure that I needed.
Right.
And now here I am 18 years later, and through that
Hmm.
journey, I met my wife on the little
Awesome.
bitty island of Guam, there in the
Mm.
South Pacific.
Sure.
uh
Awesome.
she kind of helped she kind of helped to bring me back to the spiritual side. I was still not living spiritually. I wasn't
Right.
fulfilling what I needed to in that aspect. But
Right.
and she was kind of living that mentor side for a long time with me. She
Mm-hmm.
was the spiritual leader of the house, and
Mm-hmm.
and that's not the way it's intended to be. That shouldn't be the way it is. I am the head of the house. I should be the leader in all aspects, in that sense. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so
How
now,
how do you define leadership? I guess
ooh,
what are like the main qualities or traits in leadership? It's so subjective of a
it
word.
really is because there's different. You have to be a leader at different points in your journey. So really, it's a
Hmm.
consistent growing process.
Hmm.
For me, I have had to learn how to pull back. So I'll give you an example. 7 years ago, I went to basic military training, but this time I went as an instructor.
Okay.
So people who knew me before being an instructor would tell you that I was very timid. I was a pushover. You could get away with stuff with me, and it'd be like, oh, okay, gotcha. Um,
Right.
I wasn't strong.
Right.
At basic military training, as a military training instructor, you have to be.
I was gonna say, if you're timid, you're gonna get your lunch
Oh
handed
yeah,
to
you're
you
gonna get eaten
because
alive.
those guys are gonna push you if they can.
Absolutely, and they did.
Yeah.
They did. They
Yeah.
but I looked at it as an opportunity, and in fact, I remember when I got that call that I had been selected for the job. I called up
Mm.
my wife Lena and I said, "Hey, listen, babe, you know that one job that I didn't want to have?" And she was like,
I got
"Yeah,
it.
be a drill instructor." I said, "Yeah, yep." We're moving to San Antonio. Like I was living the life. I was in Andrews Air Force Base, Maryland. I was working Air Force One. Like I had a great job. I was doing everything I wanted to
Cool.
do. And then now I'm gonna go be this guy. So that's where that spirituality and that leadership really turned for me, for
Hmm.
the better, because I looked at it as an opportunity.
Yeah, I was thinking to myself as you were defining it, that leadership for me is more about showing by example versus telling.
Hmm.
And so for me, the great leaders in my life were always the ones that, had walked the walk, talked the talk, and not someone that just is telling you that they know more than you, but they really don't have any. It's like I use the story about the my business professor in college, very just awesome guy. But I always wondered, as I got older and got out and started building up my investment company, why isn't this guy out in the real world? I mean, he's a teacher. He's telling all these kids how to run these businesses, but if he was that good, and I'm not being disparaging to, educators that are sacrificing capitalism to go into helping kids learn about business. I think that's awesome. But I always wondered, why isn't this guy out there actually doing what he's telling us to do? Is it because he can't?
Hmm.
So I just kind of always question leadership to me was the ones that were doing it. So like podcasts, for example, I just immersed myself when I was 2 months into it, like you were. I just found interesting people and I watched their podcasts.
Hmm.
I didn't go get somebody's book on how to do a podcast because I don't even know if that person knows much about
Hmm.
podcasting. But I went to podcasts and just watched and took notes and watched, and people like Joe Rogan who are the top of the list there. And then it wasn't even trying to listen to content. It was what's his style. I
Hmm.
mean, and then I would listen to somebody else that's got a whole different style, and I thought, okay, what's my style? And so to me, leadership is about showing an example. So like when you had me on the show, I talked about with my boys when my son died. I told the boys, I wanted to show them what it was like to live an intentional life,
Hmm.
not tell them. And I think as a dad, and you are as well, you know, we can tell our kids don't do drugs, don't smoke, don't vape, don't do all these things, or we can show them how to live an inspired life by not doing drugs, by not stealing, by not drinking. So that's the leadership to me, and I think that's kind of echoing how you were describing as well. But then you have this really good knack of sprinkling in this spirituality angle of it, which is awesome
Hmm.
because I think on the show we talked about my kind of belief structure. um, I'm like religiously homeless. It's like I don't really have any place to hang my hat because I don't really know much about what happens when I'm not here.
Hmm.
I certainly want to believe all the things that people tell me, but I'm a little bit more of a skeptic and I'm a little bit more of a pragmatic person. So to me, the spirituality thing is really more internalized. It's not, from the heavens or anything.
Hmm.
But again, you and I both are like, we're doing the same thing, but a little bit different definitions on how we describe our terms in our lives, but also our belief structure. I think,
Hmm.
and in my book, I wrote about this is it doesn't matter what you believe. It's how you behave, you know, and two people that don't necessarily subscribe to the same belief structure when it comes to say, um, spirituality, or however you want to define that, can still be good
Hmm.
humans. Just because you think differently than somebody else for your own reasons doesn't prohibit you from being a good person, right? I
Yeah.
mean,
And
that's just kind of common
and
sense.
and with that, the way that I kind of went about it was, and what transitioned stuff back for me was, my displeasure of how people were treating me, even as a Christian going through life.
Hmm.
Uh, what I quickly found out is that if I'm the hands and feet of Christ, if I do the things like Christ, you look in the Bible all through it, and you will see different areas where Jesus is hanging out with the people he quote shouldn't be hanging out with.
Hmm. Sure.
The bad people, the robbers, the
Right.
thieves. He's actually hanging
Right.
out with people like that because he wants to
Hmm.
he wants to be that example. And that's
Hmm.
what I realized, is that these are what these people aren't doing, and that's what I need to be
Right.
doing. So if I can be the hands and feet, then I can actually show people, right,
Hmm.
how it's supposed to be. But I don't persecute people. I don't come to
Hmm.
somebody who believes differently than me. And I think you saw that on the show when you
Absolutely.
came across and you said, I'm agnostic. And I was like,
Right.
it just created more of a conversation where I could understand a little bit
Absolutely.
better.
Right. And I think that's the beauty of conversation and engagement, and having an open mind. I know so many people that are so fixated in a belief structure, and they're so convinced that they are right. And I'm not talking just religion. I'm talking, with politics, or whatever, whatever thing they're hanging their hat on today. And it's just hard to have a dialogue with these people. And it doesn't really even matter what they're kind of standing for. It's just the way they're presenting it is very condescending. And I used to fall for the trap, Nathan, where I would get into arguments, just be lured in. Someone would say, "Well, what do you think about?" And I'm like, "I don't."
Mm. And it's
And if whatever I do think about it, I don't want to talk about it, because unless you are open, like you and I can have a really good conversation on something. I mean, if we were off the podcasting and we were just sitting around having cigars, having a really good deep talk, we could get into some pretty controversial topics, and probably walk away from it, both of us being smarter, not both of us being dumber.
hmm
And the problem with today is you get a couple people to talk about something and everyone walks away angry and dumber,
hmm and
you
for
know?
for you and me though, Jeff, it's the simple fact that we have a relationship now, going
Hmm.
from recording from my podcast where we talked for
Right.
about 30 minutes beforehand to now over to your podcast where we're still continuing the
Right.
conversation. That's where that relationship comes in, because through relationship you can talk. You can have those conversations
Right.
where we disagree a little bit more than when we're just getting to know each other.
So I had a question. I really wanted to spring this on you. This is a really good time, good time in the podcast to do this. So mental health is a really big thing for both of
hmm
us. Obviously, what we're doing here at Living Undeterred, but where do you think people are struggling with their mental health, and what's your thoughts on how we can move the needle and to improve people's lives? I mean, what coping mechanisms can people implement? What are strategies? So it's a twofold question. Why are we so miserable in the most abundant times in human history, in the most abundant country ever? And so the why, but then how do we fix this problem? How do we correct this train from going off the cliff? And that's really where it's heading. If you look at the statistics with mental health, they are just abysmal.
So in in the military side, I can come at it from this way. We have gotten really, really good at identifying help. There's a lot of people who are departing now who were the older heads, if you will, that looked at it
Hmm.
in the sense of it's going to ruin your career. It's the
Hmm.
stigma of it's going to ruin your career. But we're moving away from that to where people are starting to seek help in other ways, in other
I can
aspects.
see it. I can see in the service.
Mhm.
Certainly, I think if you came into your drill instructor, and you said, "Hey, I've got this mental health issue," certainly, a police officer, a teacher, you can see the stigma. But you're right. I think we're moving in the direction where I think it's pretty acceptable that we all have mental health issues.
Mhm.
No one's immune to it.
Well, what we've actually done is we've actually embedded individuals, trained counselors into our organizations where they can see and be able to hear. So they're actually embedded with organizations that are they see more action, they see more stuff happening. They can actually
Mm-hmm.
go into and they can recognize when people are hurting, when people are going through
Hmm.
stuff, and be able to confront it. Now, these aren't military health professionals, but they are civilian side. So
Yeah.
there's different avenues, and that's why I love the chaplain corps. I love the
Mm-hmm.
chaplain corps within the military because it's not a religious thing. It's a counseling
Mm-hmm.
thing, and they can actually
Mm-hmm.
help people when they come to them. But it's individuals realizing that they can take a step forward without falling down.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know the statistics. I think it's 22 veterans a day take their lives
Hmm.
or take their life, and that's just 22 too many. And I don't know much about your side of the fence. I've never been in the service. I can't think of a relative that has been. My dad tried to get in, but he couldn't get by the physical because he had some issues with some things he just couldn't get into. He wanted to go in the Air Force actually, but what's that?
I can give you the name of 4 gentlemen that I knew personally that took their own lives.
Man, man.
That were my brothers, that
See,
were people that I dealt with a lot, that I saw every single day. Um, and it all happened at a moment of change in their life.
when they got out right away, or was it a personal change later down the road, like losing a marriage or a business or?
I'll give you a for instance. So
Yeah.
we had worked an aircraft, a situation in a faraway land, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and we all were dealing with what happened in different ways. You know, we were actually down
Sure.
on the ground, clearing up remains, doing what we needed to
Oh,
do to be able to put it away, and we all dealt with it in different ways. So I came home, I had my wife, right? I came home, I had my wife
right.
to talk to. I had her to bear my burden. You know,
Mm,
uh spiritually, it was something where I could pray and I could just
mm-hmm.
ask the why questions. Other people came home and they drank. I don't have permission to use his name, and I'm not going to.
Absolutely. I wouldn't want you
I'll
to.
say
Yep.
Elf. So
Yeah.
Elf was the Robin Williams of the group. He was happy, he was boisterous, he would make everyone smile. You would see it just in how he handled himself.
Mm-hmm.
He was funny and he told jokes, and it made everyone else feel good. Well, we could see that he was drinking a lot. We could see that he was ingesting a lot more liquid courage, a lot more liquid thought
Mm-hmm.
into it. And we could tell
Mm-hmm.
him, "Hey, bud, you need to stop. You need to slow
Mm-hmm.
down." And he would listen to us. Everything would become better. He would go away. Later, he would move. PCS is what we call it, permanent change of station, to another location. And there, he didn't. People didn't know him like that, and didn't know when to
Mm-hmm.
tell him to stop, whatnot. And he came home. He was living just north of Austin, and I was going through what's called MTIS, which is Military Training Instructor School. It's where you're learning
Mm-hmm.
to be a drill instructor. So you're like more, you're becoming this newer person, and you get your hat, right. It's the hat ceremony is the big deal. The big brimmed hat that you have that
Yep.
you
Yep.
usually scares people. Um, so he was home in Austin, and I was like, "Hey man, you got to come down for my graduation." He's like, "Well, I don't have but one uniform." And I said, "No, it's fine. I want you there." And so he didn't come. And I was kind of like, well, I was kind of bummed. I saved a seat for him on the side, and then my friend came to me and he said, "Hey man, did you hear about Elf?" And
Oh
I was like,
man.
"What are you talking about?" And I was like, "No, he was supposed to be here today." And he's like, "Well, he uh he put he put his dad's gun underneath his chin."
Oh,
And
jeez.
so what I ended up
That's
doing for
terrible.
my first time ever wearing my hat, the thing that I had worked so hard for.
Mm-hmm.
There it is.
Yeah.
The thing I had
I
worked
get it.
so hard for, and the
Mm-hmm.
first thing I did as an official duty was go to his funeral.
Yeah.
And that was hard because he had been hanging around with people from high school. He had changed so much in the 6 years up to this point, right? He had changed so much, and he handled things differently, but he went home to a place where it's supposed to be home, right?
Right.
and he couldn't handle it. He couldn't deal with it. He was with people that had known him differently and hadn't changed with
Yeah.
him. They were still the hometown crowd.
And they're probably still drinking and doing the things that they did back in high school,
Exactly.
Um, that's a tough story, and I have to think that there's so many like that. I think I saw a stat the other day that there's 800 Americans a day that overdose, suicide, or alcoholism die from a day. So your story about Elf, imagine 799 Americans, just since we did this podcast. I don't know how many the math would be in an hour,
Mm.
but that's a lot of Americans that died. That again contributes to the misery, the pain, the suffering that we have as a country, and then the collateral damage. I mean, you got choked up there. Imagine his spouse or kids, and his mom and dad, and his brothers and sisters, and it goes on and on and on until we can break this cycle. And it's like a fifth generation alcoholic in a family. It's like, well, the sixth generation's coming, this unless somebody stops,
Mm-hmm.
unless somebody just draws a line. And that's kind of where we are with mental health today, is that somebody's got to draw the line. And that's what you're doing in your podcast. It's what I'm trying to do. It's like, a good friend of mine, her name's Jennifer Tracy. And you should hook up with her. Matter of fact, you should get her on your show. She's on LinkedIn. She's awesome. Her husband and her daughter were killed in a car crash, a car accident, by a drunk driver. And Jennifer's written a book, and she's just an unbelievable human being. She's actually forgave the gentleman publicly, which is just amazing in forgiveness, which is another great quality as a human being you have to have, because anger and guilt and revenge are just toxic
Mm-hmm.
emotions. But she has a kind of a side element to her story where she promotes and does a lot of work with first responders and fire and people like that, because you never think about the person that shows up on the triple homicide murder scene with three, or two children in a bathtub, and then the mom with their, you know, someone shot her. And you don't think about that person that showed up there, and they have to go home with their wife and their kids. It's like the prison guard, goes home after a day at work. And we just kind of, as a society, just assume that all these men and women that are first responders are just, oh, they're tough.
Mm-hmm.
They can handle it. Well, you know what? They're not. They're no different than you and me, man.
And a lot of time they think that they can handle it themselves too. Couple of
Right.
couple episodes ago, I had Lieutenant Craig Legates on, who's actually a really good personal friend of mine. He is up in Dorchester County, South Carolina, and
Mm-hmm.
he has actually gone 20 plus, I think almost 28 years in law enforcement between three different agencies, where he's been the on-scene commander going up to
Oh,
these. But there was a stigma again of mental
hmm.
health, that mental health is bad for people who are in those positions. And so
Right.
he has actually been working to change that train of thought within
Interesting.
the community. But how he did it is he went out and he got his master's degree in clinical psychology, and is actually
Hmm.
training as a clinical psychologist right now. And he
Good
he
for
has
him.
been working, and he got embedded into the county sheriffs. He's actually gotten people with mental health background to be able to be on scene to help go through this and to show people, right? It's all about how we show people
Right.
that we care.
Right.
Well, he shows that he cares by actually doing, health down days or health whatever they are, just to be able to help out. So now, as he transitions out of his active police officer
Mm-hmm.
life, he is actually transitioning into clinical psychology. And it's not just the ones who signed up for the job. It's not just the cops, but it's the spouses, it's the kids of those individuals,
Right.
because they're
Yeah.
having to deal with that in such a way that they have to see that person come through the door. He actually gave a really good poignant deal to this. He said, the greatest sound to my wife is Velcro.
Hmm.
I said, what do you mean by Velcro? He said, because when I get home and you hear the rip of the Velcro, it
Oh,
means I'm home.
yeah. Yeah. That's awesome way to look at it. When I was researching for my book, I did not a chapter, but I did some research on PTSD. And obviously that's, just goes with the territory for men and women of the service. But it's not just inclusive to that. It could be, police, fire, anybody that's involved in it. And it could be just someone who was, say, sexually molested as a child
Mm-hmm.
or something, where it doesn't, I guess nobody owns that word, or the words. It's very A lot of people have PTSD that weren't in the service. But when I was doing my research, I came across something called post traumatic growth. And I wasn't sure if you're familiar with that phrase. And actually, I'm trying to remember the guy's name. I think it's Robert Tedeschi. And it was either the 70s or 80s, but he came up with this term called post traumatic growth. And I really think it would be valuable for you to research it for what you're doing with resiliency, because what I remember about post traumatic growth is that basically you have people who are resilient. Okay, maybe that's you and me. We have things happen. We tend to just stay above it. We have things happen. So, but post traumatic growth is for that person who has an event and then suffers, has an event, suffers, and really can't get past the hump. But then something happens and they see it as an opportunity, and then they grow from it. And so he studied this, and it's actually, there's another a gentleman that I really like. His name's Scott Barry Kaufman, and he does the psychology podcast. Super. I follow him on Twitter. He's another podcast I'd recommend following. And he actually had him on his show,
Hmm.
Robert Tedeschi, and they talked about post traumatic growth. Scott has a book called Transcendence, which is an awesome book. And but this idea of post traumatic growth is just like under the rug. It's like nobody knows about it. I'm like, okay, if we're gonna, talk about PTSD, that's fine. It's an issue, but let's talk about some of the solutions. And
Hmm.
if post traumatic growth has been out there for 30 years, why isn't anyone talking about it?
Yeah, I've never heard
And
of
so
it.
and it's not a pill. It's not like a workout regime or a diet. It's just it's out there, available for everybody, and it's a way of just looking at trauma and grief or whatever you're going through as a growth opportunity, kind of like Viktor Frankl talked about in the book Man's Search for Meaning. Suffering is my opportunity. And we talked about this when I was on your show. Is like, that's the only way you can look at these things. You really can't look at the victim mindset, whereas suffering is a reason for me to fail.
Hmm.
And being in the service, you embody that. I mean, you guys and gals, you men and women in the service are taught that on your first day, you know, rise above, be resilient,
Hmm.
be undeterred. But I think as the average person out there that doesn't have that kind of training that you have, post-traumatic growth is available for all of us. It's out there. And I think as a podcaster, you and I need to do a better job talking about these things to people so they just know that, hey, if PTSD is out there, well,
What
so is post-traumatic
what's
growth.
the alternative?
Right.
And
Right.
you put it great when you say, I choose to be better, not bitter. And
Right.
in the same way, that's what so it's actually funny that you say that. So anytime that I'm on, I always have my notepad, right? I've got my notebook
I
ready
do
to
too.
go, so I
I
can
got mine. I got mine going too.
just so I can, because I have to write it down. Learning is how we get better. So the only way that I can,
Right.
you asked about my leadership. Well, my leadership style is simple. I have to grow in how I can handle things. I can't look at somebody and say, I know what you've been through. I can't say that to every
Mhm.
single person that I meet because I have
Mhm.
not been through everything. So I can't say I know where you are. What I can say, however, is I know where you are and I want to help, but how can I do that? If I myself haven't been
I
through it.
love that. I love that because I saw someone, maybe it was Matthew McConaughey was talking about
Mm.
this in one of his, I like his podcast. He's pretty good on talking about deep philosophical things. And he was talking about how, like, when somebody dies and everyone's like, well, or maybe something happens traumatic and you're like, well, I understand what you're going through. I feel sorry for you, and then they just kind of move on.
Mhm.
And I think a wise person would say, I understand what you're going through. How can I help? I mean,
Exactly.
that's how, if you really want to start helping the mental health numbers get more favorable and improve people's lives, don't just like and comment and paste and post and all these things on social media. Actually reach out to the person and say, hey, you know what? Certainly I feel terrible that your son died or your wife died or your husband or your dog or your cat or your mom or dad. How can I help?
Mhm.
Do you want me to set up a GoFundMe? Do you want me to go to the store to you? Do you want me to help you pay your bills? I mean, how can I actually do something actionable to improve your life instead of just patting you back saying, "Oh, Nathan, I'm sorry this happened. Good luck."
Mhm.
You know?
You know what I've started to do with my subordinates? is I don't is when they come in and they look like they're ready to talk, like they want to talk to me about something. I look at them and I go, "Okay, first off, do you want me to listen to respond, or do you want me to listen to listen?"
I like
Because
that.
there's a huge difference between the two, and I've learned that each of my different I'll just call them, lack of a better term, employees, when they come to
Yeah.
me
Yep.
to talk, they're coming to me with something, and I've learned that each of them is going to come to me with something different.
Hmm.
And so now, do you need me, and now for the mental well-being, this is a huge thing. Do you want me to listen to respond? Because sometimes people just need you to listen, just to
Sure.
hear.
Yep.
Not that they need you to understand what they're going through, but just
Right.
that somebody else can be there to carry that burden,
Right.
and that's what they're looking
Well,
for.
I know you like to write. What do you think about journaling? What do you think about journaling for mental health?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is a huge thing for me. I actually started really so before I used to journal just as I went through my daily Bible study. It was a way of being
Hmm.
able to connect it. It's SOAP. It's scripture, observation, application, and prayer. How
Hmm.
do I do those, each and every day? But now whenever
Hmm.
I do it, if a thought comes to my mind, I write it down,
Hmm.
and then I leave some space because I want to follow up on that. I don't want to be in the moment right then and there and just be writing it fully down. I want to be able
Right.
to contemplate. I'm a thinker. I'm going to think it out.
Hmm.
So for
Right.
me, my mental health has been so much better because of journaling. I can sit
Hmm.
there, I can write it down, and I can put everything that I want to tell somebody, everything I want to throw at somebody, everything I want to be angry about, and I can put it on paper,
Hmm.
and it's as if I'm saying it to that person, but it's my release. I don't have to hold it in. I think where we get hung up is that we some people like to hold on to it, and that anger
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that pain just starts to
Right.
build. But if you write it down, it opens up a world, and then later on, it also becomes a reflective thing, because now I can go back to when I was having a bad day,
Mm.
and okay, now I can see that that's actually a bad day. What I'm going through today is not bad. General Gronsky,
Right.
General Gronsky, I just recorded with him a couple of days ago. Major General, U.S. Army, retired, uh, almost 40 years of service, and
Wow.
he told
That's
me
awesome.
every single day that he got up, he has a 3x5 index card, and he writes three things that he is grateful for.
Hmm.
He doesn't even care if it's something small like my eggs tasted great this morning, or
Sure.
as
Yep.
great as
Yep.
we didn't lose another person today.
Right.
Something that he was
Yeah.
grateful for, and he puts it into a jar down in the kitchen after he's done writing it. And it's his way of
Hmm.
being able to look at it and go, even in the small things, you have to be grateful.
I love that. I mean, I know a good friend of mine is out kind of marketing what's called a gratitude journal.
Mm,
And he's a motivational speaker guy. And he's so this journaling thing is becoming more mainstream. For me, I don't keep a journal, but I write a lot. So it's kind of like my own, journal. There's no really structure to it. And I see when I write, I typically don't go back to the notes. For me, the writing is more of, I think you can visually see
mm,
something, you can hear something, and you can see something, or you could hear someone talking. So it's like if I can write, listen, and see, I got a better chance of retaining it. So if you tell me something, I'm hearing and I'm seeing you say it. But if I write it down, those are three like implants or imprints I'm having of this thought. And I may not remember all of them, but I have a better chance of recalling valuable ideas and comments people say if I write it down.
hmm
So the journal thing, more and more guests I'm having on my show are, you know, telling me that they think journaling is very important. Now I meditate. I don't know if that's something you practice. I know meditation. The nice thing about meditation is it's secular. I guess it's not attributed to any. You could be fully Catholic or you could be an atheist, and
hmm
you could still meditate successfully because all you're doing is just being aware of thoughts. You're not. I think people think with meditation you're trying to control your thoughts. It's just the complete opposite of that.
hmm
And so I don't know if you've ever meditated, but for me, I just started about right after Seth died. I just couldn't shut my brain off. It just was going and going and going. And I'd go to bed at night and I'd replay things over and over. And I was drinking at the same time. And I thought, okay, I need to figure out a way to compartmentalize some of this stuff. And I got into an app, a guy I listened to on a podcast, got his app on my phone. And now it's every like 10 minutes. I get up in the morning, and a lot of times nothing happens, Nathan. It's just like I sit there and think in my mind. But the key is that it's non-judgmental.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of saying, "Oh, that's a crappy meditation session," I just, okay, that was it. Sometimes I have amazing. There was one time I was meditating in Rotan, I think it was. My son and I were scuba diving. We're certified divers, which is
Hmm.
a huge coping mechanism for me. And I went up on these rocks, like you see in the movies, and I kind of sat there and got my phone out and set it up. And I just crossed my arms and I just sat there on these rocks. And the people in our dive team were on the shore watching me. And I wasn't doing it to show off. I actually thought I was around the corner far enough to have some privacy. Well, I decided I was going to do a 20-minute meditation, which for attention deficit Jeff, that's hard to do. And 10 is sometimes hard. And I'm sitting there meditating, and I'm really in this great session. I mean, the equivalent of a religious experience. I mean, I'm transcending it was amazing. And I wake up and I'm sopping wet and freezing cold.
Hmm.
So what had happened was a shower came through, like a 2-minute little rainstorm. I didn't feel it.
Mm.
And I got back to the shore, and everyone's like, "Didn't you see that little?" Because it wasn't a storm; it was just a shower came through, like you have down in the tropics. And they're like, "You didn't?" I said, "No, I didn't feel anything." Now I've meditated for 3 years. I've only had like 4 times ever that's happened where I can literally say I was like an out of body experience.
Mm-hmm.
It was very spiritual for me, very spiritual. So again, I throw that out there for people that are looking at maybe adding another arrow to the quiver. I would suggest meditation, because you can make of it what you want of it. And it's the fact that, if you're a strong man of faith, then maybe your meditation is you're
Mm-hmm.
being aware of your thoughts of, talking to God or to whomever whoever you worship. I don't know. I'm just
So in my
trying to
way,
get people to be more control and more aware of their mind, because the mind causes the majority of the mental health problems in this for
mhm,
humans.
and it's in those quiet moments sometimes that the voice you have to discern of who it is that's
Mm,
trying to talk to you at the same time, right? And so in
good
my
point.
life, in
Yeah.
meditation, my meditation is when I meditate on the word. And
Hmm.
that's my version of it, because now I can think and I can comprehend and I can put into action where I'm suffering at.
Hmm.
See, the good thing about scripture when I read it is that I
Hmm.
could read it one way, you're going to read it a completely separate way, because we're going through two different things in that moment,
Right.
in that day.
Right.
So we're going to read it two different ways. It evolves with how we are and what we are going through in those moments. Uh,
It was almost written left to be interpreted differently, but right.
mhm,
And that's, I guess, one of the beauties and the mysticism with the Bible itself, is that everyone can read it and really have a whole different set of, um, you know, um, how it affects them so differently,
mhm,
and everyone can be right. I have not actually. I read the Bible a number of times in high school and college, just in those normal years where I was kind of searching for meaning.
mhm,
And I do remember many aspects of it that were very interesting, and a lot of parallels to my own life at the time. And I think that's one of the nice things about it, is you can pretty much go to it any time in your life, and you can find something in there. A lot of it may not apply to you at all, but
mhm,
you're going to find something in there. And again, for me, just as I don't like the word agnostic, because I think that people just assume that I'm a non-believer.
mhm,
Here's what I believe, and I told you this on your show. I believe in being a good human. I believe in my fellow man. I believe in humanity. I believe my dog has feelings and can understand when I cry that I'm hurting.
mhm,
I believe in just doing the right thing at helping people. So whatever box that fits in, that's where I struggle with, because I'm not religious, but I'm not an atheist. It's like I'm still curious on a lot of things. Let's say I'm open minded,
Mhm.
If the evidence showed up in my life, then I would certainly jump on it. But I just at 56, I've just never really had any evidence presented to me. So I'm still open to things.
Mhm.
I'm certainly most of my friends, I would say, are uh, I don't want to say religious people, but they're probably more Christians.
Mhm.
But I think that's one part of my life that I really can say I just haven't really found anything yet. I know where I stand on most things politically. I know where I stand on a lot of things, but when it comes to that, I just don't know. And I've always been kind of comfortable, Nathan. I've been okay with not knowing.
Mhm.
You know, it's hard to explain. You know.
And I think you explain it quite well. I really do. But that's why I have started this journey of looking at it. Like, what does it look like to people? Because it is
Hmm.
different. And I think that people question it so much that
Hmm.
that we tell people you need to have a strong pillar for spirituality, but we don't tell them what it looks like. We don't
Right.
paint a good picture of it, because it
I
is.
do have a strong pillar. I just can't explain it to people.
Exactly.
I don't. I just can't explain it. It's like people ask me all the time, and I've actually been, I think, on some podcasts that I didn't get asked to come on because they were worried I was going to be out there with some agenda. So I'm not smart enough to know what agenda I'm even trying to promote. I'm not.
Mhm.
I like people. I like to talk. I like to solve problems. I like to learn. And you're in the same boat, or you wouldn't be doing podcasting. I mean, podcasting shows that you are willing to have a wide variety of people on to engage in conversation and to learn. And so you can finish the podcast, go on to the next guest, and something from our conversation will have resonated with you,
Mhm. Like,
and that's the beauty of engagement. And that's why I really think, going back to mental health, I'm kind of really hung up on that.
mhm.
I think I think engagement, conversation, and vulnerability, those are kind of the three tenets of trying to fix this issue with mental health. And the problem is so many people just keep things in so internalized. And men are
Oh
really,
yeah.
you got choked up today a little bit. I cried on your
Mhm.
show. You know, I think that's what men need to do more. We need to do more crying. And sometimes it's in front of people, sometimes it's ourselves. But
I'll,
I'm a crier, and I think you are
I'll
too.
tell you right now, if I had said his actual name, I have never gotten through a class. So right now I'm the commandant for Airman Leadership School. I have never
Hmm,
made it through a class without crying in front of my students, and I have 38 of them in the military. Every single
hmm.
class, 7 different classes a year, 38 students each one, and I have never made it through without crying. Just because
That's such a strength,
when I
Nathan. That's
say his
such a
name,
strength, man.
that's where the power
Yeah,
was at. But
yeah.
and I'm proud of you, Jeff. Like, just the way that you have taken and transitioned bitterness, betterment. How you have
Hmm.
navigated through some of life's most horrible things that you don't want to experience. And we recently, within the last 2 years, have adopted our son.
Yeah,
Uh,
tell us about that a little bit.
Man,
I
this
remember
guy,
sharing that.
this
Yeah.
this
Now
guy,
he's 13, right?
he is 13. He'll be 14 in a couple of actually in about 2 weeks from now. He'll be 14. But he came to us.
Tell us how that went down. That's an interesting
Whew,
story.
wow. Okay, so we went through the pandemic. We started this
Yep.
at the very beginning of the pandemic, and we thought, well, crap, now we're in this rock and a hard place where we've got a kid that we love, that we want to hang out with, but he's hour and a half, 2 hours away, and the military's telling me you can't travel, you cannot go get him and do anything. So we went a few weeks and ended up from the point in time that we said we wanted him, like we knew he was our son, to the point in
Hmm.
time that we finalized everything in the court. We did everything virtually with the court, which was really kind of cool.
Hmm.
um it was 8 months. It was 8 months. It didn't even stop. It didn't deter us at all, right? We went through the full process.
Undeterred, man.
I wanted to wrap it in there somewhere.
Yeah.
And so he came to live with us, and it's been a 2-year battle because of what he went through mentally, what he went through emotionally. They had him, you had talked about Adderall and stuff with your
Yeah.
son, and it was the
Yep.
same thing for Stan when he came to live with us. They had him on Adderall, and that first time that he was with us, he was only supposed to stay for 3 days, and so he had enough
Hmm.
medicine for those 3 days. Well, then the pandemic hit, and he stayed with us an
Oh man,
additional week. So we had him for
he
10,
didn't have
10
his
days.
Adder.
Didn't have it. It went 1.5 days of having bad side effects of coming off of it. And then
Isn't
after
that crazy?
and after that day and a half, let me tell you, Jeff, I don't know why they were trying to hide this kid. Like,
Yeah,
I don't know
exactly.
why they were trying to hide him because he is such a brilliantly smart kid.
Yeah,
He's way behind in school. He's caught up a
yeah,
whole lot. But it's almost like they were
right.
trying to hide him, and so we took him completely off of Adderall when he came to us.
Good for you.
We found a different medication that has kinda helped
Yep.
some of the mental side of some
Yeah.
things, as we continue to navigate, but we have actually taken that
Right.
from 1 all the way down to 0.25. So we've even lowered
Yeah.
that down just simply because they had him on all this stuff that was hiding who he
Yeah.
truly was.
Well, and for him, it can become almost a placebo.
Oh, yeah.
You could probably give him a sugar pill and tell him, "Hey, this is your Adderall," and he probably now would probably not even know that his body wouldn't know the difference.
Probably not.
And again, I'm not a doctor. I can't speak on that, but yeah, I'm you and I certainly aren't advocating for people to cut their medicines off their kids, but certainly talk to your physician. But I'm the same way. If there's one regret I have that I have to take to my grave, I did a really bad job as a dad understanding what Adderall was.
W
I was too busy
but
in my
you were
life.
told, "Here's what it is, here's what it does."
Right.
That's what you were
Right.
told, and that's what you knew. Now that
Yeah.
we're where we are, my
Right.
my wife's a nurse, she understands that stuff a lot better
Right.
than even I would, but we
Mhm.
just knew that there was something different, and whenever we saw him off that meds for whatever, because we weren't able to get him to his medication, and we saw the transition, it was like, "Oh my gosh, oh, who is this child?" But
Mhm.
then when we saw who he was and his personality, it was like, "Okay." And so since then, we have dealt with some stuff where he would try to go to sleep, and he wants
Mhm.
his night medicine, and
Mhm.
he comes from a family of addiction,
Mhm.
and so he screams out, I want my medicine, I want my night, and we won't give
Mm.
it to him at that point. Like, we're like, no, you can stay up
Mm.
all night, we're going to stay with you, but you're not going to get it,
Wow.
because you have to
Wow.
fight through those times because addiction is that bad.
Yeah.
And even in him as a 13-year-old child, sometimes, mentally he goes back to 6-year-old, right?
Yeah.
But to get him through that, we have to be right there with him and stand firm with him and say, no,
You do.
you're not going to get it. And that's what keeps me
Because you
going.
can, with addiction, there's so much enabling. And I go back to my son and my wife, where I can recall times where, especially with my wife, because I drank with her,
Hmm.
when she was battling her alcoholism, or, the first year after Seth died, we both drank heavily. So I was enabling. And then with my son, I would give him money. I got him a car. I But what parent doesn't do
Yeah.
that? I mean,
No.
at this, I listen to people like on these talk shows, and they'll say, "Well, you can't enable your." And I'm like, you know what? It's hard. What you tell me what the difference is
Hmm.
between giving my son a shirt on his back and a $100 bill when he's heading off down to the street to go live somewhere, because I won't let him live in my house, or I let him in my house because I love him, and then that goes south. I let him out and he's on his own and he dies. So you tell me what's the
Hmm.
right thing. It's like there's no textbook out there. And I can see where enabling is just part of being a good parent, but again, I can see where enabling is the reason why the child never gets
Well,
better.
and you asked, what can we do better? Right? You said, what can we
Right.
do to combat mental health? Well, you know what we can do is
Hmm.
realize that people aren't cookie cutter,
Right.
that your
Absolutely.
situation is no different than mine.
Right.
I used to pray to God, like, give me I want a testimony. I want a testimony. I've never been through anything in my life. I want to be a testimony. Well, here we are,
Hmm.
40 some odd years later, and I have my son, and I'm a part of his testimony. Right. So it
Absolutely. That's
prepared us
great.
for that moment. So what we need to understand is not everybody is the same. We can't handle every situation the same. And guess what? I don't need your advice on how to handle my son because you don't know what he's been through.
Yeah. Right. Absolutely. 100%. And I think when I look back and kind of, we have the benefit of hindsight in all of our lives. We can go back and we can, you know, kind of relive, which again can be a really bad thing to do as well, because especially if it's painful, we don't want to go back very often.
Hmm.
But when I go back and look at how things went down, first of all, Nathan, it happened so fast, yet it felt like 100
Mm.
years. I mean, my son's addiction journey was from 15 and 16 to when he died at 23. And now we're going on 6 years that he's been gone. And to think that he'd be 28 now and he has a 5-year-old daughter, that's just unfathomable. I can't wrap my hands around that sometimes. Now with my wife, a little bit different scenario. She was 46 when she passed, married 21 years. But the same thing, it's like I look back and I think, how did this happen on my watch?
Mm-hmm.
Like you said earlier, I'm the man of the house. I'm not trying to be sexist here, but it's like, you know, I'm the man of the house. I grew up in a house where my dad was a doctor. My mom was valedictorian, magna cum laude in college. I mean, and she decided to stay in and raise 4 boys. So she basically became a housewife. Very easily could have went out and conquered the world and being a tremendous, whatever she was going to be. But she wanted to be a mom. That was what my mom wanted to be. I grew up in that environment.
Mm-hmm.
So when I got married, my wife didn't really want to work at that time. She wanted to stay in and raise the boys. So, that's kind of the world that I grew in. But I don't know. I struggle with some things when I go back and look at what I could have done differently with both those people in my life. But the reality is, here I am today. I've got 2 other boys, and I got my dad still here. My mom passed away in November, and I'm doing the best that I can with the cards I've been dealt. And I think your followers and people that are jumping on your, listening to what you're doing now as a new host of a podcast, um, I think they're looking for hope and inspiration. That's really what you and I are trying to do, is um, give people some hope and not try to. I've always said there's 2 ways to change behavior. You can scare people or you can inspire them.
Mm-hmm.
you know? And I think we've been scared enough. I mean, we're scared with the elections, we're scared with everything, COVID, we're scared of everything. And it's like now it's the time of we got to put fear in a box and we got to start talking about the good things that people can do and the positive stories and focus on that each day. Like the general you said wrote those 3 things down. I love that idea.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what a simple, free thing you could do. And I was thinking to myself, I'd almost do that at night for me.
Mm.
Like when I go to bed at night, have a notebook, a little note card by my bed. 3 things. Had a great conversation with Nathan. Met a brand new individual to be on a podcast. Told my son I loved him 5 times today. Called my dad out of the blue for no reason, not because of
Mm-hmm.
anything. Maybe you put 10 gratitudes down. And I think that's a powerful thing that I'm taking away from our conversation today is the journaling. I think that's something I certainly need to be putting into my life a little bit better.
Absolutely. And it's Jeff, I'm really proud. Like I already said this once. I'm really proud at what you're doing to get through what must have been the worst time of your life, to go through losing Seth and then Prudence like shortly thereafter. It just
Hmm.
it can't be. But you're taking it, and now with the tour that you're going to be going on here soon,
Hmm.
is just a part of that healing process, because you want to bring people along with you in that healing process. So the fact that you're going to different cities and
Yeah.
establishing and bringing somebody from that city that's been through that and letting them
Hmm.
tell their story to their community, it puts the focus on the issue and not on the person.
Yeah, and I think it's so easy for us to think we're in a canoe, fighting upstream with our own personal demons and our own battles, when in reality, we're in this massive boat together, paddling together in
Mm-hmm.
the same direction. We're trying to improve our mental health. We're trying to improve the quality of our life, our relationships, our health, everything. We're all trying to achieve the same thing. Nobody's trying to achieve something different.
Mm-hmm.
We're all trying to, literally, if I wrote down the 5 things I want to have in my life, they're going to be almost the same 5 things you have
Mm-hmm.
in any country, any socioeconomic background, any race. I mean, we all want to be happy. We all want to be freedom. We all want to have freedom to live in a society where we can pretty much do what we want to do. Um, we want to be healthy, and we want to have enough financial resources where we can do what we want to do
Mm-hmm.
and give away money as well, be philanthropic. There's a lot to do about, but I think you and I if we wrote down 5 things, I mean, we're going to have pretty much the same
And guess
thing.
what? I'm gonna do some things that are gonna fail for me, but you know what? They
Yeah,
may work for you.
right.
And what you may have done that failed for you may work for me, but you
Right.
know how we change that? We have the conversation.
Talking. Yeah.
It's
And
so
that's where I
simple.
just don't watch the news anymore. I think it's been 2 years that I've watched any, like, say, Fox, CNN, NBN. Yeah. I have enough people in my life that if there was a meteor coming to to Iowa, people would be texting me, "Hey, dude, get out of Iowa." And I'm like, "What? I got to turn on the news. The world's coming to an end." I'm not worried about that.
Mhm.
I don't feel like I'm missing out. What am I missing out of? Eh,
Somebody telling it from their
Someone tell me what
perspective.
I'm missing. Yeah, I don't really care what politicians are arguing about today. I don't really care about that,
I
and I just don't. And people can say, "Well, Jeff, you're missing out. You're less informed." Yeah, but I'm
Yeah,
happy.
but anymore, any of that is not so much what you believe, but what you're against. So I don't care
Yeah,
what you're
right. Good
against.
point. Good point. Because you're against so much, you're tuning out anybody else's opinion anyway. And I just don't. I feel sorry for the person that watches 3 hours of TV and all it is just interviewing people on topics that are controversial and everyone's arguing. I'm like, God, I'd rather talk to Nathan for an hour on a podcast. You know,
Absolutely.
this is just much more enjoyable for me.
No, I get it.
Well, listen, this has been great, man. I really enjoyed it. And I'd certainly want to get you back on the show down the road and follow up and see how you're doing with your show.
Absolutely.
How can people reach you? I'm going to have links to all the places where people can hear your podcast. Talk a little bit about your podcast. Where can people get it, and then how can people reach out to you if they have
Well,
questions?
thank you for the opportunity. So it is, you can go to any major platform, Spotify, Amazon, Google, Apple podcasts, just pretty much Stitcher, any of them, and look up the Wartime Leadership Podcast. The Wartime Leadership Podcast. And if you add .com at the end, it'll actually take you to the website where you can see all the different episodes. If you are interested in being a guest, there's a guest intake link on there. Just click on that, put in your information. We'll get in contact with you. I've got a great guy, Jeff, who I have known for almost 20 years, that he actually is helping me out with the podcast as the producer, kind of
Hmm.
bringing me along. But the podcast is just that. It's a conversation. It's time that we have good conversations to help people out to be able to understand what spiritual resiliency looks like and to define it in our own individual personal senses. And of course, with it being a leadership podcast as well, we look at different leadership styles and how they have developed within individuals as they've gone through different stages of their lives. So if you want to reach me, Nathan Coy, NathanCoy, at wartime-leadership.com.
Spiritual resiliency and living undeterred. Those are brothers. They're compatible. There's so much that can come from those terms, the goodwill that can come from that, and people that whatever you're battling, whatever you're trying to fight through, living undeterred, spiritual resiliency, mental toughness, all these phrases are used. And again, thank you very much for being on the show. And I know our paths will cross, hopefully on the tour. I can have an opportunity to meet you out there and maybe do a quick interview. We're doing so many live events on the tour. I'm having the RV wrapped as we speak. It's going to be pretty
Oh, I
cool. I
saw
mean,
the tour.
it's
The tour looked really nice inside, I'm telling you.
I would say the RV may be a little bit in your face, but I'm not like we're out pushing. The only narrative we have is improving mental
Hmm.
health. So I don't mind being in people's face on that. But we're excited, and I'm looking forward to meeting you on the tour. But again, thanks for being on the show. It's been an honor to know you in a short amount of time. And again, I don't have to tell you this, but I'm going to tell you this: keep living undeterred. Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.